Hello guys, and welcome back to another week of me building a self-tracking app in Svelte 5. And for this week I want to focus a bit more on the mobile side of things. Since the main target platform is going to be a mobile device, we need to figure out how we're actually going to put our Svelte app on a mobile phone. What are the alternatives out there to actually embed this web application on a mobile device? And how can we make it function somewhat like a native application? Of course, we're not going to get that exact touch, look, and feel as if we were to make it in Kotlin or Swift or whatever, but we can at least try to make it behave and look as a native application to our best ability. So I want to start by researching some of the alternatives out there. I know I've heard of Capacitor, there's also Tauri, and bubble wrap. There are some alternatives out there. So we need to figure out which one of them are going to suit our needs the best. So let's go ahead and do some Googling, shall we? Alrighty, I have done some digging now, and there were quite a few alternatives out there for building a native app like this, but I think I'm actually going to settle on the Capacitor framework. It seems to be the most mature right now. I've also looked a bit at Tauri, which is definitely promising. I really like what Tauri is doing, and Tauri desktop apps are really nice and performant, but it does not seem that Tauri is ready for mobile yet. They seem to be missing some of these native features that I'm kind of longing for. It just does not seem that mature enough. From what I could understood, Capacitor has been around for quite a long time, even back to the dates when Apache Cordova was around and everyone was building apps with that. So this seems to be the best choice, and this is of course just embedding a web view. But the nice thing is that they have a lot of different plugins that you can add to have different sorts of native functionality in the app. You can have things like an action sheet, and then you simply install a plugin. So you don't have to install plugins that you're not going to be using. We're just going to be installing that functionality that we're actually interested in using. And it seems to be the easiest because you can pretty much use any web framework with this Capacitor. It simply just embeds your application. I also had a little bit of a look at Svelte Native, which seems to be a bit unmaintained, to be honest. It seems to be kind of like a hobby project. It doesn't seem to have that many commits. Things aren't really moving at that pace that I was hoping for Svelte Native. So I think the best choice here is actually going to be Capacitor, since it's just widely adopted everywhere and it should be easy to find support and should be relatively maintained as well. And then of course we're also going to make the app a progressive web app, just like I mentioned in the first video. So it could even be used in the browser. They wouldn't even have to install it as a native application, so to speak. They could just have it run inside of their web browser on their mobile device and it should work. There's also bubble wrap, which seems to be very similar, just embedding it in a web view, but it also seems that this does not have that much native functionality. If I wanted to have an action sheet, or if I wanted to have a local push notifications, it doesn't seem that is that supported, which definitely is the case with Capacitor. And of course this is also only for Android. So if I wanted to make an iOS app in the future, where perhaps if I were to get a MacBook and a license for $100 a year, well then I could do that with Capacitor as well. So it just seems to be the best choice right now. So that's what I'm gonna go with, and I think I'm gonna install it now and create a backup of my project and just play around with it a little bit and see how well it works. Alrighty, so now I have installed and set up Capacitor, and won't you look at that? We have our app running in the Android emulator. We actually have our web app kind of like we designed it. Things actually seem to be working, so I can create a trackable like this. And even perhaps log it. You can see our beautiful, nice little modal there pop up, and we can go ahead and see here if we are really precise with our fingers, we can see the value here as well, and even go into the journal if we were, and save that. As I said, this bottom navigation bar is definitely going to have to change for the native app. It's not going to look like this. We're going to have the more traditional Android layout, but now we pretty much have a working mobile app. It's definitely rough around the edges and it doesn't feel like a mobile app by any means, but we do have a mobile app, and we didn't have to write the same code twice. We didn't have to spend another year writing this in Flutter and having to do loads of learning. Now we can just use our web technologies, and yeah, it seems to work pretty well. You can also have hot reload or live reload, as Capacitor calls it, but for that to work, we would actually need to have some sort of self-signed certificate from the looks of it. So I wasn't able to get that working because I'm using crypto random UUID, and that actually requires that you have a HTTPS connection to the server. And for that to work, well, the Vite development server has to be running on HTTPS, and then you have to add all kinds of certificates. It was kind of problematic from the looks of it. I can just now run npx cap run Android. It will build it from the output in my dist folder and then display it in my Android emulator. So I'm pretty happy with that. It can actually work pretty well. So now I'm going to take a look at making this just a traditional progressive web app as well without the fancy capacitor stuff. We still want it to be installable with just a Chrome browser and things like that. So I'm going to take a look at that now. So I found this neat Vite plugin called Vite PVA. So this seems to be all that I need to actually get up and running with a progressive web app. As you can see, it will actually generate all of this web app manifests and service workers and all of that scary stuff that you would have to do yourself. And hopefully it should work with the development server as well. So yeah, I'm going to try using this and see if I can create a progressive web app. All right, so now I've set up this Vite plugin PWA, and I just copied the settings from the old project that I had. For the manifest, you had to have some sort of favicons and some screenshots of the application for it to be an installable progressive web app. But now if we take a look inside of our browser, we can see that is actually now installable. We can see that we have the app manifest working, all of the icons working, and I can also click here install app if I want to install it locally on my device. If I were to open this in the Chrome browser on my Android phone, I should be able to install it and have it on my home screen. So that's really nice and should be a good alternative for those who don't want to install the native application. But I am happy with this morning's work, so I will see you guys another day. So a problem that I noticed while trying to make this more mobile friendly is that we can't really have hover effects. You know, if you were to move your mouse over a button on your desktop, then of course you would have an effect that maybe makes the button a darker color or emphasizes it a bit. And we can't do that on mobile, obviously, since we don't have any way of hovering. But when we do add a hover effect that we want to use on desktop, it actually kind of breaks. So if I just press this, you can see that the hover state is kind of left. Even though I stopped hovering, or even if I stopped pressing this button, we can see that it's still emphasized there, and I don't like that. So I managed to solve this by using the active directive here instead, and this only shows it whenever I'm actively pressing on it. So you can see that it actually stops whenever I stop pressing here. But this will of course be a problem on desktop because there we still want to have hover effects. When I move my mouse over this button, I want it to emphasize it, not only when I press on it. So in order to fix that, I had to use a media query, which I've never seen before actually. So we have a media query for pointer, We can specify here if we have pointer fine or pointer coarse. So pointer fine is active when we are on a desktop and when we actually have proper hover support. So when we have proper hover support, then we want to have hover effects. But if we are on a mobile device, well, then the pointer is coarse instead. So instead of having a hover effect, we will instead have an active effect. So now I can instead use this hover feedback class. So whenever I'm on the mobile, we can see that this hover is only active whenever I press on it. So another thing that I added to improve the user experience is actually to listen to the back button. So on Android, when we slide to the right here, we actually go back, and this is something that I want to mimic. But how are we gonna do that? Well, we're gonna have to keep track of all of the routes that the user has been on. So if I press here and I go to the form, well, how do I know where I am? I need to keep track of that. So I added a routing navigator state that I also update whenever we have routed to a new route in the router. So then I can just listen with this Capacitor app for this back button. And when we press this back button, well, then we just go back to the previous route. So if I pull to the right here, we can see that, boom, I'm sent back to the trackables. And this is, of course, something that I will have to implement for modals as well. But this simply proves that it's now possible to go back with a more native feel. Welcome back to another day. And today I actually wanted to do a bit more designing because I wanted to start working on the goals system as well. We have this sort of thing planned out where you can set goals like daily steps or save $3,000 and things like that. But I haven't really thought that much about how we're going to construct these goals. How will the design actually look for the user when they want to create such a goal? I think this can be quite difficult to do on a mobile phone as well. We're going to have some pretty nested layouts, so it's definitely not going to be that user-friendly to create a goal, I would believe. But of course, we're going to try our hardest to make it as user-friendly as possible. So I just want to think this through a little bit before starting to code and design in Svelte as well. So I'm going to do some Figma design. Alrighty, so now I've created this basic goal system that I was talking about. And my idea with these goals is that you can add different conditions. So you might add multiple conditions, and only if all of these conditions are met, then the whole goal is considered to be met. And for these goals, then I have thought of two different conditions for now. So we have a comparison condition and a goal met. So the comparison is just checking different numbers and things like that. So checking if one number is greater than another number, or checking if something is equal and things like that. And we might also have some sort of sub-goal system where you might have another goal defined, and in another parent goal you might have another goal met condition, so that multiple goals have to be met. And then for these conditions then, or for these comparisons, well, then we are able to use either dynamic values or numbers. So you might have something like total income is greater than, and you set a number like you want your total income, weekly total income to be greater than 3,000 or something. And then you would add that, or you might even do something like adding a dynamic value. So you want to have that your total income is greater than your total expenses and things like that. So you might have a dynamic value here instead of a number as well. And underneath here, we also have a calculation. So we might have different sorts of sources. So we might have an aggregation, and in that case, an aggregation is just a very basic sum or average or max or count. So if we wanted to have a total steps, for example, we would have a sum aggregation where the entity is steps. And we can also add things like filters. Perhaps you want to check that, oh, I don't want to drink more than, I guess, 3 alcoholic beverages in a week. Then you could have a filter that says that you only filter those entries where a specific field is set. So specifically that this is some sort of alcoholic beverage. I'm just theory crafting here, just brainstorming some different ideas. But it's very nice doing this in Figma before actually writing code, because I come up with all sorts of different edge cases and things that I do want to add, and also start thinking a bit how I want to structure the system, but also just the design. Instead of trying to come up with the design on the fly, I actually do it and actually see it visual in front of me before writing the Svelte code for it. So I think it's definitely a good habit to keep up designing things beforehand. I'm pretty happy with today's work, so I will see you guys another day. Alrighty, so this morning I also did some code design for this goal system that we had, that I did the previous day. So my idea with these goals is that we're actually going to model them like variables. We're not going to store any of the important information in the goal itself. Instead, we're going to have an actual goal, a variable, which will be used for evaluating if this goal is met and so on. So each of these goals will be of the goal variable type, and they will have goal conditions. And then for these goal conditions, these are the conditions that we have here in our design as well. So we might have these 2 conditions for now, the comparison condition and a goal met condition. So depending on the type of goal condition, we will have a different outcome. So we're going to have this interface goal condition value, which will be evaluated as a variable as well. So we have a comparison goal condition and a goal met condition. This comparison goal condition will take in the source, the operator, and the target. And this source here might be either a constant or a variable. So in this case, it might be a number, a constant variable, or it will be a dynamic variable value. And then we will have an operator like equals, greater than, less than, and things like that. As we evaluate this variable, we'll have the goal variable type. Well, then we're going to return for each of these goal conditions a value. So we'll have the condition ID from the goal condition, but we'll also return a primitive value. And this is the primitive value that is returned from the goal condition. So this comparison goal condition will return a goal comparison result. And this is so that we can see kind of how far we progressed in the goal. If we have 2 values, if we have perhaps total steps as the source and the target is just 2000, then we will get the actual source here, which will be the actual value of the total steps. Maybe I had 1500 steps or 1000 steps, and then the target will just be 2000, and then we'll have a met boolean that will just say, is this goal condition met? But it will be different if we have a goal met goal condition, because this is just going to fetch another goal and check if that goal has been met. So it will fetch another goal by its ID and check if that has been met, and in that case it's instead going to return a boolean. So it's going to return if this other goal was met or not. So it might look something like this. As a JSON, we might have then this variable which will be of type goal, and the value will contain the conditions. And in here we're of course also going to have some form of time scope. So we might have weekly goals or something, or weekly steps I mean. So we might have a time scope like this, a simple time scope. And the only conditions that we have then is just a comparison condition, which checks the total step variable, which is not a constant. If the total steps is greater than 40,000 during a week, then we're going to get back a map here simply where this goal condition has a primitive value where we have a goal comparison result, and the met here will then be true because we have met that weekly goal. So that's kind of what I had in mind for this goal system. I'm not yet sure how feasible it is to implement it in this way, but I think we're actually gonna try now to implement this in code and see how far we get. So yeah, let's go. Alrighty, so now I have tried to implement this and it seems to be working quite well. I created some basic unit tests for it. So here I have a simple goal and I have two entries, one of 10 and one of 13. Then I created this aggregate variable, which is the sum. We make sure that this sums up to 23. And then we have this comparison in the goal to check that this sum is actually equal to 23. We create that variable, then we get the goal result. And then we expect that to equal 23 because that should be the value, and the goal should evaluate to true because they are equal. So if I run this test now, we can see that that actually passed. We also have things like multi-condition goals that that depend on multiple conditions. Here we have that the sum should be equal to 23 and the mean should be less than 30. If we run that, it also seems to be working quite well. Then we also have kind of dynamic targets that they are dependent on a variable instead of having a constant value. We even have this goal with dynamic targets. So I have two different form IDs. I have the income and the expense. So first the income is 10 and then the expense is 13. Then we have just the sum of the expense and income. And then we check if the total income is greater than the total expense, which it isn't for the first case. So the first income is 10 and the first expense is 13. So this evaluates to false. But then I add a new entry, a new income entry. So I add $10 or something. And then all of a sudden my income should be 20 instead, but the expense is now 13. So now this goal should evaluate to true because the income is greater than the expense. So if I run this little test as well, we can see that it passes through. So the system seems to be working quite well, which makes me very happy. So that's all that I managed to do for this week, and I'm pretty happy with this week's progress. We now have a somewhat working mobile app. I could actually perhaps publish this as an APK and install it and use it on my phone, and it would be no problem. We also got some nice back button and hover states now, so it behaves a little bit more like a native application, but we have a long way to go there to actually give it that right touch, look, and feel. But we also started working with the goals, which is something that I wanted to focus on early on because I personally want to use the goal system quite a lot, simply to set the goals and stay accountable. So that's something that I'm happy that we managed to get going for this week. For the next week, I think I will do even more goals and do a proper goal editor so that we can actually create and edit goals. But I also want to focus a bit more on the form fields and everything, just getting a basic app that I could actually use on a daily basis. Just create all of the minimum viable product, so to speak. Maybe I don't need to go and venture off into every single direction. Maybe I could actually make it a bit more useful so that I could start using it, because it will be much easier to highlight all the pain points if I start using it on a daily basis and I don't just sit and try to come up with whatever problems might occur in the future. But thanks a lot for watching this video, but I hope that you want to follow me on this journey for next week as well, and I will see you guys then.